This is what I've done. Okay. I'm ready. What do you do when it affects you the most? You should care about this because when you purpose in your heart to help someone else, it could benefit you in the long run. My name is Valerie Pickens, and I'm an Intro to Communication student at UALR. Today, I'm going to tell you about my service learning experience. First, I'm going to tell you about what I did at my service learning. Then, I'm going to tell you about a principle and concepts connected to my service learning. Then finally, I'm going to tell you about how I can improve on my communication. So let's get started. I completed my service learning at the Temple of Restoration Church. That's me, of course, and that's the teacher that actually helped me during the process. And that's the actual picture in the background of the church. You should care about church because it can actually help people improve in their moral values. The mission of my organization, according to their website, which was templeofrestoration.org, emphasizes a few key ideals, primarily to bring glory to God, and then to grow in usefulness through service and discipleship. I actually volunteered to teach the women's Sunday school class, and it was held in the assembly hall of the church. They gave me a teacher's guide, which was a commentary that I used to study in order to prepare the lesson. I also did utilize handouts, and I presented with PowerPoint presentations. And I supported their mission statement by teaching different lessons on discipleship and how to serve others. So let's continue and talk about the communication principle and concepts. There is a communication principle and two concepts connected to my service experience. You should care about this because it can actually help you to understand people better. The relevant communication principle is simultaneous. The definition, according to Euler's Survival Guide 2017, is simultaneous communication is the constant exchange of behaviors that can be interpreted by the other. Each person is a sender and a receiver simultaneously. There really are not turns to take. Any structure we impose on that process is just that. It's an artificial structure. And that artificial structure masks the fact that the process is ongoing. An example from my service that illustrates this is when conversation would take place in the classroom, you had a sender who was watching the receiver's expressions. And sometimes it would prompt them to elaborate a little further. My example illustrates this because the principal, because when I was teaching, I also noticed that I had sometimes verbal communication and sometimes nonverbal expressions. And they would say like, amen. Go ahead, sister. And then someone would actually look at me like, what on earth is she talking about? So the first communication concept is empathy. Moving on, the definition according to Adler, Rotman, and Dupree 2017 is the ability to project oneself into another person's point of view so as to experience others' thoughts and feelings. An example for my service that illustrates this is I taught on different lessons that actually showed Jesus showing compassion. My example illustrates this definition because one particular lesson that we talked about in particular, and we talked about in depth, was when Jesus fed the multitude of people who followed him. He didn't turn them away, but instead he fed them because they were hungry, and so he empathized, he showed compassion. The second communication concept is paraphrasing. The definition, according to the textbook, is feedback in which the receiver rewards the speaker's thoughts and feelings. An example from my service that illustrates that concept is, as I listened to the response of the class, I noticed that paraphrasing was necessary. My example illustrates this definition because when I found myself having to repeat what some of them would say. because I wanted to make sure that they understood the lesson, the question that was asked with the lesson plan, and also I wanted to make sure all the other students understood their main point. So I would paraphrase. So let's talk about how I can improve my communication. Based on my experience, I can use communication concept and the ethical implications to improve my communication and help improve my community. You should care about this, improving your community, because actually it's where you live and it could make it better. One communication concept I could use to improve my communication would be analytical listening. The definition, according to the textbook, is listening in which the primary goal is to fully understand the message prior to any evaluation. I chose this concept as my learning experience because when the class would give their feedback, many of them use personal experiences. So I can use this concept to improve my communication by not being judgmental on the front end, and to take time to fully listen for an understanding. An ethical implication I could use to improve my community would be respect. The definition, according to Euler's Survival Guide 2018, respect is actively listening to and showing regard for the ideals of others before evaluating and responding to their message. I chose this implication based on my service experience because the response from the class varied. It varied in ages and their opinions. It was different age groups. I can use this implication to improve my community because I learned how to respect others and be respectful of their responses regardless of their age and experience. So in conclusion, today I told you about my service learning experience. First, I told you about what I did at my service learning. Then I told you about a principle and concepts connected to my service learning. Finally, I told you about how I can improve on my communication. And for that, I am grateful. Because in order to teach, I had to study, which ended up benefiting me in the long run. Thank you.